tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications. The following program is a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com to learn more about this and our other weekly storytelling programs. Thank you for listening, and enjoy the show.
Good evening. I'm storyteller Otis Jiry, and I ain't your grandfather. From where I'm from, we don't do bedtime stories. And if that's what you were expecting, you're in the wrong place. If it's terrifying tales you're after, well then, I've got just the thing. Get comfortable, settle in, turn off the lights, if you dare. Your night is about to get a whole lot darker. Who needs sleep anyway?
Good evening. You're listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark. Welcome, dear listeners, to Season 15, Episode 14. I'm your host, Otis Jiry, and in this episode, I'll be performing 3 tales to terrify you, courtesy of authors Nicky, Exposito, Nick Carlson, and Micah Edwards. Tonight we will hear stories of historical hysteria, reptilian rampages, and fungal fury. You're listening to the standard edition of tonight's program, which contains the first spine-tingling story. If you'd like to show your support and enjoy an extended version of this and our other episodes with twice the terror, visit simplyscarypodcast.com and click Patrons in the upper menu to sign up today. Thank you for your support. Now, it's time to take a walk together down the moonlit trail, so lock your doors, turn your lights down low, and settle in. The show is about to begin. You've all been in this situation. You're enjoying a nice meal, relaxing with family and friends. You take a swig of wine, and suddenly you're turning pale and can't breathe. And that's when you see your cousin, who you accidentally left in the will, smiling broadly. Yes, the world is full of all kinds of toxins, whether they're given to you by a secretive enemy or delivered to you by a snake whose only desire in life is to be left alone and see you die a horrible, painful death. Tonight, we delve into the nature of things that leave a lingering, unpleasant tingling behind. Nicky Exposito is first up with a tantalizing tale of a city flowering after the events of the Civil War and about a family member whose unfortunate circumstances seems to be bringing ruin to all those around her. Beware, you see, of angering someone who knows just what to do with the likes of you. Without further ado, I present to you the Ballad of Kate McCleester, Poisoner of Mulberry Street. On March 3rd, 1868, Mrs. Temperance Wood twisted a bedsheet into a rope, tied a noose, threw it over a rafter of her Fifth Avenue manor, climbed atop her mother's favorite chair, and stepped off. Her cold body was found hours later, found unfortunately, by Miss Alice Newberry, Temperance's 20-year-old cousin, recently arrived from London and residing in the household. Temperance's husband, Dr. Clarence Wood, was overtaken with grief. A devout Methodist and a son of a minister, Dr. Woods publicly expressed disbelief his beloved could have despaired so. To those close to him, however, he revealed his wife had been experiencing frightful delusions in the weeks preceding her death. Mrs. Woods, previously a great lover of animals, developed a strange phobia of dogs, crossing the street or fleeing whenever she happened upon a canine. Then she began seeing black dogs in the shadows, gnashing their teeth and growling menacingly. The extent of Temperance Wood's madness became achingly clear upon discovery of her diary. Pages had been torn out, seemingly at random, but her last entry, penned by an unsteady, trembling hand, was a nightmarescape out of the Book of Revelations. The black dogs followed her everywhere, she wrote. The black dogs were blasphemous things. They stood on two legs, like men. Goat-like horns erupted above their flopping ears. Their eyes glowed like the fires of the adversary. Her last written words, nearly illegible, struck fear into the hearts of the New York police investigators. I shall return as a spook to haunt the deformed hag Kate McCleester, who pushes her cart down Mulberry Street, for it is her witchery that so doomed me to my fate. Her room was searched, and one of Kate McCleester's misshapen jars of cold cream was found amongst Mrs. Wood's belongings. The opaque cream had an odd pea-like tinge to it. Dr. Woods, grief once again inflamed, went on a warpath. Sadly for the doctor, his fiery accusations came to naught. A platoon of coppers found Kate McCleester, an impoverished cripple of the notorious 5 Point slum, and confiscated her cart, and, on the correct grounds, her wares were stolen property. Her misshapen jars of cold cream were tested in every way conceivable, and no poison was found. Dr. Woods claimed his late wife's bowels, upon autopsy, were found riddled with an odd green sediment. But Dr. Aaron Krog, the physician who performed the procedure, refuted this account. He stated Mrs. Woods' organs were largely normal for a woman her age. He also noted that Mrs. Woods had been pregnant. According to Ellis Island records, James McCleester arrived in Manhattan on July 19, 1845. Roughly 2 years later, on September 4, 1847, Mr. McCleester's family arrived to join him. They are listed as Anne McCleester, age 35, Catherine McCleester, age 12, Kendra McCleester, age 10, Michael McCleester, aged 8, William McCleester, age 6, Arthur McCleester, aged 4. The family hailed from County Kerry, Ireland. Anne's sister Molly, who had been something of a healer in her hamlet. She'd fixed broken bones and cared for the infirm, but also assisted young girls in need of making a pregnancy go away quietly, as well as married women with a desire for the same of their drunken, brute husbands. James McCleester, a skilled carpenter, found some success in New York. After summoning his family to the New World, he provided them a life that made them the envy of their fellow Kerry brethren. The McCleester clan lived in an apartment amongst the Germans on Rivington Street. The boys attended grammar school, while Kate and Kendra were pupils of the Miss Julie Clay Academy for Foreign-Born Girls, a small institution in the 11th Ward that purported to provide an English-style finishing school education at a bargain rate. The family lived happily until 1850. That year, rough scaffolding collapsed beneath James McCleester's feet. He split his head open on hard dirt. After James' death, his widow and children were plunged into the harsh existence their countrymen knew so well. No longer able to afford their apartment, the family relocated to a room on the third floor of a wooden tenement building on Mulberry Street, in the middle of the infamous 6th Ward. Kate found work as a seamstress, Michael and Willie as newsboys and street sweepers. In 1852, Arthur joined his brother's operation, and Anne followed her daughter to the workshop. Kendra, however, continued her schooling at the Miss Julie Clay Academy. The Cleesters occasionally fell asleep with empty bellies, but Kendra never missed a tuition payment. This aberration can be understood under one overriding condition. Kendra McCleester was beautiful. Kendra wasn't the comeliest girl in her small country hamlet. She wasn't the most delectable creature trawling a Tenderloin District dance hall. No. Kendra possessed a beauty that rivaled the sculptures of ancient Greece and the marvels of the Renaissance masters. Her form was nymph-like and willowy, her hair a shining river of golden curls. Her green eyes sparkled like emeralds over high cheekbones, a delicate patrician nose, and a plump lips the color of cherries. A beauty so singular and radiant, she would have had her choice of suitors who would pluck her from her life of poverty, her family clinging to her ankle. So it's unlikely Anne McCleester, a woman with an eye for investment, would have risked her daughter's pale skin to the wrath of beating summer's sun or her slender fingers to the maw of a Singer sewing machine. Kendra did contribute to the family finances in her own way. On warm nights, she and Kate took to the crowded streets of 5 Points, buckets of hot corn under their arms. Kendra, possessed of a voice rivaled only in beauty by her cotton-clad form, sang Irish hymns to lure customers. It was said Kendra could quell an alehouse brawl, tame the meanest of the six-ward bullies, and stop a riot in its tracks with her angelic voice. Kate, aware of the danger faced by women alone, took to dressing as a man imposing as Kendra's brother. She was extremely convincing. Former student, she was of Rebecca Kleiner, the notorious fence, confidence woman and mistress of disguise, whose Germantown dry goods store was then a bastion of the underworld. Miss Kleiner had also taught Kate the art of pickpocketing. As Kendra hypnotized the bruisers and gamblers with her siren song, Kate slipped soundlessly through the crowd, relieving the men of their ill-guarded belongings. Tales of the beautiful hot corn girl traveled beyond the filthy, diseased streets of the immigrant neighborhoods to the mansions of Fifth Avenue, where they found a certain Louis Van Wooten, son of Jacob Van Wooten, the materials and real estate magnate whose family owned half of Brooklyn. Louis fancied himself as an amateur anthropologist and embarked on occasional, proctored and guarded, trips to the lower wards where he observed the habits of the ignorant, filthy, and destitute. He got into his head to find this legendary goddess of a hot corn girl, a pursuit towards which no expense was spared. He fell in love with Kendra McCleester at first sight. He escorted her to the opera, bought her beautiful European garments, instilled in her a taste for wine and sweets. The hot August of 1855, Louis Van Wooten proposed. He'd take her away, he professed. Her life in the slums would soon be forgotten, but her family would not. Louis promised to find Anne and Kate well-paid work as personal attendants for two of his many female relatives. He'd send the boys to the finest academy in Manhattan. In 1 month's time, he promised Kendra he'd come with a carriage to collect her. On August 28th, 1855, a week before Louis returned to retrieve his bride, a fire broke out in the McCleester's tenement. Kate and Kendra lay closest to the window. They'd stayed up late, giggling with each other about flowers and horses and wedding dresses. Kate awoke first, nostrils singed by smoke, and found the walls of the family abode torn apart by angry red flames. As fate would have it, a cart from the nearby dry goods shop sat in front of the window, loaded high with fabric and bags of grains. Before Kendra shook the sleep from her head, she must have felt herself falling as Kate pushed her unceremoniously out the window. Kendra landed rough atop the cart, but out of further harm's way. She picked herself out of the assortment detritus that broke her fall. Seconds later, a thud. A smoking creature of nightmares, charred black and red, rose from the same dry goods cart. Kendra screamed as the creature revealed herself to be Kate, with 12-year-old Arthur's blistered body cradled in her arms. Arthur McCleester didn't make it through the night. His brothers and Anne had already perished by the time Kate found them. Kate, unmercifully, survived. The fire melted the right side of her face, leaving a wrinkled mass of scar tissue that resembled uncooked bacon and a blinded eye welded closed. Her right arm had to be amputated above the elbow, as her flesh was reduced to moist char the consistency of mud. Forever after, even during the hottest days of summer, Kate wore ankle-length skirts and shawls to hide the extent of the abuse that the fire had done to her body. We don't know whether Kate thanked God she was able to save one sibling, or if she resented Kendra for her untouched beauty. Kendra may have revered Kate as her savior, or recoiled in fright from the monster who was once her sister and closest confidant. We don't know if the two cried together for their lost mother and brothers, or if Kate cursed her more beloved younger sister for the fortune that had favored her since birth. We don't know how the sisters' relationship ended, but a week later, Louis and Wooten returned to the 6th Ward in a carriage drawn by white horses. When Kendra McCleester left with her fiancé, she was alone. Sometime during the post-war years, around 1865, Methodist minister Peter Woods heard the Almighty whisper in his ear. For 1 week each month, the good Reverend would forsake his respectable Fulton Street church. He'd travel with a dispatch of disciples to the bowels of the 6th Ward, where he'd hold daily sermons and save the souls of the wretched thieves, prostitutes, and river pirates in the main room of Dropper Wallace's dance hall. Dropper Wallace was an odd choice for a business partner. A compact, big-bellied fellow with a crooked nose and scarred-up fingers, souvenirs of decades' worth of bare-knuckle brawling. The closest Dropper had ever come to religion was taking the Lord's name in vain. His dance-hall hussies were infamous for, at Dropper's direction, feeding Johnny's cheap whiskey laced with chloroform, then selling the unfortunate marks to the Blue-Bell Dogs gang for $1 a pop. The poor wretch, if he woke up at all, would find himself shanghaied aboard a ship halfway to South Carolina. But Reverend Woods offered Dropper $5 a day for the exclusive use of his establishment, and $5 was $5. A handful of beggars and bullies from the neighborhood did filter in, by accident or out of curiosity, while the Reverend preached. Those who stayed cackled and cheered in amusement at all the wrong parts of the Bible. David's lusting for Bathsheba, or Lot and his daughters in the cave. Only a precious few took to Reverend Wood's teaching. One of that precious number was scarred, scrawny, filthy, crippled Kate McCleester. The tenement fire had been a master thief, one that put even the wiliest 5 Points Gip to shame. In minutes, the fire had stolen from Kate McCleester all she'd ever had and all she would ever have, and stole her family. It stole her possession. Down one eye and one hand, she couldn't operate a Singer machine or pick a pocket. It stole her beauty. Kate had been a handsome woman with a quick wit and sturdy, child-bearing hips. After that terrible night, Kate would never bear children. It became a joke amongst the 5 Points youth. Kate McCleester's female parts had been welded shut, cauterized, but no one could say for certain, because any man who caught sight of Kate with the clothes off would immediately turn to stone. For months after Kendra's departure, Kate wandered the streets crying in pain, surviving off coins dropped by charitable citizens, moved to pity by her ugliness and tears. Finally, she became desperate enough to seek out Rebecca Kleiner. Rebecca told everyone who'd listen she'd offer Kate a floor to sleep on, free of charge, but Kate's pride wouldn't allow her to accept such charity. Everyone who'd listened knew Kate's refusal of Rebecca's generous offer had less to do with pride than the well-known fact that Rebecca never did anything out of charity. But Kate did enter into a business relationship with Mrs. Kleiner. She'd pay a wholesale rate for bits of fabric, jewelry, and assorted odds and ends from the Kleiner dry goods shop, items liberated by Rebecca Kleiner's army of child pickpockets from careless newcomers at the ferry terminal. Kate would then load her wares into her cart and walk the streets of Manhattan, selling to businessmen and aristocrats and criminals and anyone else whose heart softened at the pathetic sight of her. Reverend Wood believed he'd caught Kate McCleester's Irish Catholic soul, and he paraded her around like a trophy. His flock, more observant, believed Kate's interest in Protestantism was considerably less than her interest in Reverend Wood's handsome 30-year-old physician's son. Dr. Clarence Woods accompanied his father to 5 Points, where he'd bandage wounds and hand out ointments. He thought he might write a book about the distinctive physical characteristics of the criminal immigrant class, and his father's venture provided him with a perfect opportunity for research. He'd successfully swallowed his distaste for Kate's scarred, lopsided face and kindly took the time to ask questions about her life. Kate, who spent years courting only pity and scorn, lapped up Clarence's kindness like a kitten laps up a bowl of cream. When she learned the quiet, dark-haired beauty who accompanied him to sermons was his wife and the daughter of prosperous Westchester farmers, Kate embarked on a strange campaign to befriend the sweet young beauty. Temperance Woods, a sympathetic and delicate creature, treated the dirty cripple with cordiality matching her husband's. The attendees of Reverend Wood's sermons, witnesses to Kate's evolving relationship with Clarence and Temperance, couldn't decide whether Kate was so delusional as to believe she could tempt Clarence away from his lovely, pious bride, or if Kate simply resented the pair for achieving the blissful marriage she'd forever be denied. One cold Sunday, Clarence Woods allowed Kate to lead him to a secluded spot in the bowels of the dance hall. 10 minutes later, young Dr. Woods' voice cut through the walls to the assembled congregation. "You distasteful wretch!" he screamed. "Goodness and holiness cannot exist in such a hideous monster as you." Dr. Woods reappeared, red-faced and sweating. In front of his dumbstruck father and his sniggering flock, he took Temperance by the hand and led her away. The two never attended a sermon in 5 Points ever again. By nightfall, the whole 6th Ward knew Kate McCleester had propositioned the minister's son and had been spat out like sour milk. That, it was later agreed, was the night Kate McCleester broke. Paddy Good watched her slip a coin to a lieutenant of Rebecca Kleiner before he led her to a back room of the dry goods shop. Red Mary, a street-walking owl who found customers amongst sailors along the East River, swore she saw Kate take a wrapped package from a shifty-looking river pirate, and the Mags, a trio of feral waifs under the protection of the Bluebell Dogs gang, reported watching Kate, alone in the burned-out former gambling hall that was her occasional home, madly stirring some concoction in a metal pot. The girls swore, on their dead mothers' graves, whatever Kate had in that pot glowed with an unnatural light. The next day, Kate obtained a crate full of misshapen glass bottles and jars. She began selling, along with her pilfered trinkets from Rebecca Kleiner's shop, off-colored white cold cream, tonic for sore throats, and a blue-colored something she swore cured the barrel flu with only a drop. 4 weeks after that, Temperance Woods was dead. She wasn't the last. Gabe Callahan was the best safecracker east of Philadelphia. If you asked Gabe Callahan, he was the best safecracker in the country. He told tales of bank vaults cleared in San Francisco, Chicago, and New Orleans. He swore he was a wanted man in 6 states, but thanks to Rebecca Kleiner's disguises, his wanted posters looked like 6 different men. In fact, his disguise had been so convincing, New Jersey authorities were convinced he was a black man, and Boston thought him Chinese. Gabe liked to talk, but despite his tendency to inflate his own infamy, he was a valuable addition to a criminal enterprise. He'd swore his allegiance to the Bluebell Dogs and to Jig Clary, the gang's leader. Jig was impressed with Gabe, and Jig was not an easy man to impress. A burly bruiser who stood over 6 feet tall and weighed at least 200 pounds, Jig earned his moniker because he, pistol in hand, enjoyed forcing beaten opponents to dance a little jig before he thoughtlessly dispatched them with a bullet or a hard knock to the back of the head. Gabe, orphaned young, met Kate McCleester when they were both 15, both students of Rebecca Kleiner's Sunday School for young pickpockets and sneak thieves. Gabe had been a criminal protege. He masterminded the successful heist of the Bank of Savings on Chambers Street, with nary an ounce of blood spilled, before his 18th birthday. But he also once attempted to snatch a police officer's copper badge from right under his nose as he sipped coffee at Rona's Cafe, earning himself a sound thrashing by Nightstick. Word amongst the various 5 Points gossip channels was that Gabe and Kate McCleester were financed. The two young criminals delighted in ribbing and challenging each other. They'd compete over who could break into a shop faster or whose bounty would command the greater compensation from Rebecca Kleiner. Clayt likely had no intention of marrying Gabe. If her sister married Louis Van Wooten, and Van Wooten, as promised, found Kate a position as a lady's maid, she could have courted a maid of much higher status than the scrawny 5 Points gangster. A young tradesman, perhaps, or a clerk, or a bookkeeper. But after the fire, after her sister's abrupt departure, Gabe Callahan became Kate's last remaining option. As it turned out, she was left with no options at all. Gabe, horrified by her monstrous appearance, wanted nothing to do with his childhood fancy. 4 months after Temperance Wood's death, Gabe Callahan found himself scared of dogs. One night, he'd stolen away to St. Bridget's Church by the seaport with Frank Graley and Mug Shannon. The priest had been Jug Cleary's childhood confessor back home in Sligo. Out of lingering affection, he allowed Jig companions use of the hidden compartment behind the portrait of St. Michael fighting the dragon for, well, the gangsters never specified their exact need of a discreet stashing spot, and the priest wisely didn't ask questions to which he did not desire an answer. In actuality, the Bluebell dogs didn't use the compartment for much, only short-term storage for goods, when they had them, too conspicuous to fence immediately. That night, they'd been sent to retrieve a ruby pendant liberated from the safe of an Astor cousin, a love token for his Swedish mistress. Stray dogs slept in the churchyard as the priest had a soft spot for creatures. The Bluebell dogs typically ignored their animal namesakes, but as the trio moved stealthily throughout the graveyard, behind the church with the ruby pendant, Gabe Callahan let out a violent cry. "The dogs!" he shouted. "They're the size of the horses!" His two compatriots found him thrashing about knife in hand, engaged in shadowboxing with a mangy brown mutt. They disarmed their companion and dragged him away, desperate to quiet him before they drew the attention of the coppers, or worse, marauding river pirates. Gabe insisted the three had been stalked by a monstrous black dog with jaws like an alligator's and a ram's horns sprouting from its head. Soon, Gabe had been all but pushed out of the gang business, and for good reason. His fits of delusion became more frequent and more dramatic. He could be seen wandering the docks of the East River, lunging at the air with his dagger and screaming curses at the black dogs with human arms and yellow teeth. He almost made a bloody end at the hand of the Mud Ghouls gang, who took offense to his yelling his head off outside the hiding holes where they lurked, stalking ships at the docks. Gabe was saved, however, by a patrolling peace officer named John Staub, whose presence prompted the pirates to scatter. Staub, an ambitious young man hoping to advance his position within the police force, spent most of his evenings pacing the docks. On July the 5th, the day after Independence Day, he watched Gabe sprint toward the water, howling like a banshee. He started after the disturbed man, but he couldn't catch him in time. An hour later, Officer Staub pulled Gabe's cold body off a pile of discarded timber where it had washed ashore like wreckage. News of Gabe Callahan's death seized the 6th Ward in its mighty maw and did not let go. 5 Points dwellers recalled the tale of Temperance Woods and her husband and father-in-law's insistence she'd been poisoned. Those sober and of reasonable intelligence connected the two demises, the pious beauty and the thieving gangster. Both died at their own hands. Both were haunted by monstrous black dogs, and both incurred the vengeful, jealous wrath of Kate McCleester. Whenever Dropper Wallace's dance hall wasn't being utilized as a makeshift church for Reverend Woods, it was an establishment called the London Owl. The London Owl was a den of pleasure. Wallace employed only the most beautiful girls to serve as paid companions to his wealthy clients. He paid the procurers better than other proprietors. They allowed him first pick of their stock, young women lured to the city with promises of money, love, or adventure. Once Dropper Wallace had his sights set on Kendra McCleester. His procurers tailed her to and from the Miss Julie Clay Academy, waiting for an opportunity to snatch the pretty girl like wild game. But Kendra never strayed from the well-populated streets unless escorted by one of her brothers, a trusted friend like Gabe Callahan, or her sister Kate, whose skill with the knife rivaled any man. One afternoon, Kate McCleester appeared on the doorstep of the London Owl and insisted the goons, the hired goons, take her to Dropper Wallace. He received the young woman in his office, where he was busy counting the money his girls had charmed out of their nightly companions and stacking it in his safe. Kate implored Dropper to let her sister be. Kendra, he explained, was currently courted by a young man who wished to marry her. As a trade, Kate offered her own services as a lady of the night. She could make more money separating men from their money than she could as a sweatshop girl or a pickpocket. Dropper considered Kate's offer. Then he undid his trousers. If Kate desired employment at his establishment, she needed to prove to him she could perform her duties to his satisfaction. After Dropper had been satisfied, he laughed in Kate's face. He had no use for a plain Irish peasant. Kate should scurry along now and secure herself a husband while she still could, before the scant womanly charm she did possess withered away with age. She was already 20 years old, practically an old maid. September of 1868 was an unseasonably cool one in Manhattan. At the London Owl, coquettes for hire in short dresses sat at golden tables with their paying paramours of the night, watching a traveling French burlesque troupe kick higher than their heads. Scarlett, a red-headed German, poured another glass of Italian Cabernet for Rags MacDonald, the leader of the Thumper crew, a Bowery gang specialized in thuggish enforcement for hire. Rags revealed, barely concealed glee in his voice, that he'd seen two of the three mags lurking about like Irish alley cats. The mags, three orphan girls all called Maggie, lived as wards under the protection of Jig Cleary. Jig provided them with sustenance and shelter. They provided him with their earnings from pickpocketing and flower selling and street sweeping, and with information gleaned from networks of street boys and girls who pursued similar employment. Rags caught sight of the blonde mag and the red-headed mag spying on Dropper's marks, and he didn't know what had become of their third raven-haired. But he knew the presence of two bags meant Jig Cleary planned to claim a portion of Dropper's nightly earnings by threat or by force. Delilah, a sensuous quadroon, who migrated north from Mississippi after the war, fed sliced oranges to Ned Werther, a New York Commissioner of Sanitation, or Commissioner of Safety. Delilah didn't know, and Ned didn't either. A loyalist of Tammany Hall, his sole job duty was the prompt collection of bribes. He regaled his comely companion with a tale of heroism and civic duty. The New York City police force, supported by Tammany Hall, had busted up a gang of river pirates looking to rob a docked brig called the Sunshine Chain. The hero of the day had been a young officer named John Staub, who silently stalked the mud ghouls for months and planned the entire operation. Sally Joan, a Westchester farm girl with a halo of auburn curls, massaged the chest of Andrew Darlington, heir to a timber fortune. They watched the French dancers finish their set with a rowdy shaking of their breaths. Then the music stopped. Scarlett dropped the bottle of Cabernet. It shattered across the floor, splattering Rags MacDonald with red wine. She leapt up from his lap and stood stock still, her face a mask of horror, one finger pointing towards a dark corner. "The dog," she cried. "The black dog. He's staring at me." Delilah let out a wail. "The black dog has horns and is grasping for me with human hands." Sally Joan strengthened her grip on Andrew Darlington until she practically strangled the man. "They speak," she screamed. "They serve the lords of the day, and they're taking us with them." "The black dog is standing on two legs," another woman added. "The lord of the day desires us as his brides." And then the men of the London Owl saw what the women saw. They saw great dogs, the size of elephants, standing on filthy hooved feet. They saw their hands, five-fingered like those of a man beckoning. They looked into the black dog's glowing eyes, their ram-like horns, their matted fur. With a cacophony of screams, the girls fled into the streets, tearing at their clothes as they went. The French minxes and their musicians, confused, dashed out after them. The customers, not wishing to lounge around a prostitution den infiltrated by monstrous black dogs, followed the women. The London Owl staff, who watched their paychecks walk out the door, gave chase. Finally, even Dropper Wallace was drawn from his office. He barked and threatened as the women, in various states of undress, clasped hands and, still wailing, began to dance. The men, simultaneously aroused and repulsed, fell into a state of reverie. Some swore, later, they saw giant horned and hooved dogmen, bodies covered with black fur, writhing and twirling along, human hands pressed against the girls' bodies. This fantasy was crushed by the arrival of Jig McCleary and 17 bluebell dogs, summoned by the mags, armed with brickbats. Lured by the promise of delusion and disarray, Jig intended to exploit the situation for all it was worth. It's said that Rags MacDonald took down 3 bluebell dogs with only his belt as a weapon. That a giant black dog, walking on 2 feet, lifted Dropper's bullies one by one and smashed their heads on the hard dirt ground. That Jig Clary beat Dropper to death on the floor of his own dance hall, splattering his brains into every nook and sinful cranny. That Jig McCleary himself fell when a counterfeit Roman statue toppled from its pedestal and landed on top of them. That the police, when they arrived to break up the brawl, found men lying in pools of their own blood, exsanguinating from gashes that resembled the bite of an African lion. Apparently, one rascal or another had managed to rob the London Owl. Dropper's safe was found open and empty. Jig Clary survived his injuries, but he was never the same. His mind regressed to that of a child. He took to wandering the streets of the 6th Ward, earning the pity and disgust of travelers by begging them to locate his mother. This time, even the simple and drunken denizens of 5 Points could draw a straight line between Kate McCleester and the monstrous black dogs of the London Owl. On the streets, people discussed Kate's modus operandi. Had she, a transient who lived between abandoned buildings, managed to cook up poison so potent it drove its victims to madness and despair, while remaining tasteless and undetectable? The name of Molly, Kate's medicine woman aunt, danced about the lips of every Carey migrant. Or was Kate truly a witch out of 16th century delusion who could unlock the gates of the underworld and command its fiends to do her bidding? Then the gossips began to speculate about Kate's next target. She aimed her witchery at those whose beauty she coveted or who had betrayed her in some fashion. Speculation was barely necessary. Only one woman satisfied both criteria: Kate's sister, Kendra. While Kate pushed her cart and scrounged for pennies in the 6th Ward, Kendra lived a charmed life on 5th Avenue with her husband and children. Kendra sang in church, painted lovely landscapes, rode horses, and pursued philanthropic missions, while her husband Louis and his brothers had assumed control of their father's business. The couple birthed 3 children, Susan, Alexander, and Jeanette. The happiness of their enviable lives was interrupted only once. In 1868, when their youngest daughter, Jeanette, fell off her horse, broke her neck, and perished. Lewis never stopped his trips to the 4th and 6th wards. He heard tales of Gabe's demise and of the disaster at the London Owl, as well as implications his estranged sister-in-law had been the cause of all the chaos. Dr. Clarence Woods was a neighbor and occasional shooting companion. He knew of his wife's sad demise, but Louis Van Wooten never shared these yarns with Kendra. He knew his wife still grieved the loss of their daughter, and he was loath to press her nerves further with talk of her sister. On Christmas Eve, 1868, Louis and Kendra Van Wooten hosted a dinner party. In attendance were a number of prominent citizens, an Astor, a Vanderbilt, and a prominent architect, as well as Dr. Clarence Woods and his new wife, Temperance's cousin, Alice. When questioned at length by the police, all corroborated the same story. Halfway through the braised pheasant, Kendra brought up the topic of her Aunt Molly O'Doul. She described her mother's sister as a homely wench with unsettling ways whose favorite pastime had been bathing in the lake near the St. Michael's Rectory, tempting the loins of the men of God, encouraging them to betray their vows. Two girls in town wandered into the fields one night to retrieve a lost pet. They swore they'd seen Molly out there amongst the crops, naked, legs in the air. But Molly's paramour was no wayward man from the town. He was no man at all. According to the girl's tale, Mary copulated with a black-furred fiend with cloven hooves and great horns like a ram. Soon it became known about the town that Molly O'Doul was pregnant. The night she gave birth, the midwife emerged from her abode pale-faced and shell-shocked. For 3 weeks she could not speak. When she finally regained her voice, the poor elderly nurse shared the tale of Molly's offspring. There were 6 of them, ugly things, each the size of a kitten. The imps bore the limbs and features of men, but each possessed the snout and flopping ears of a dog, and their bodies were coated with thick black fur. Atop each soft head, 2 hardened numbs like the beginning of horns. The next morning, the midwife was found cold in her bed. Molly told everyone her baby had died. No one believed her, because it was well known around County Kerry those who crossed Molly O'Doul could expect a visit from her 6 monstrous children, and once paid a visit by that vile half-dozen, one would not be alive much longer. That's horrific, Kendra, Alice Woods breathed. Why would you share such a tale while we're eating? Because, Kendra said, her voice low and defeated, I see 2 of those cursed children right behind you. The heads of the guests collectively snapped toward Alice and to the Van Wootens' sitting room behind her. The room was dim, the servants hadn't lit the candles, but they all saw enough. 2 creatures lurked there, black, hairy things with snouts and ears of dogs and the horns of rams. They extended 5-fingered human hands. They crept toward the party. The screams were immediate. Alice Woods turned pale and fainted into her husband's arms. A mad dash commenced toward the servants' quarters, the kitchen, or the Van Wootens' ballroom, anywhere that promised an escape from the mansion without the necessity of crossing the path of those accursed monsters. From the kitchen, Jane Mortimer howled. Her husband barreled in to save her and nearly collapsed himself. 2 fiends coated in black fur crouched on all fours. The Mortimers registered their cloven hooves, then what, exactly, the blasphemous horrors were doing with their mouths. Entrails dangled from their blood-flecked horns and dog-like snouts. On the kitchen floor, the disemboweled corpse of the Van Wooten middle-aged housekeeper. Leonard Carr, the architect, climbed through a window. Once he'd made his escape to the Van Wootens' well-kept yard, he realized he had not skirted danger, for 3 creatures lurked in the garden. 2 danced in the moonlight, enticing the learned man to join them. Then a 3rd fiend emerged from the shadows and locked its cold human fingers around his wrist, as though to drag him to their revelry by force. He broke away and ran like a besieged rabbit. The mark the creature left in his arm, 5 greasy fingerprints, did not fade, even with repeated washing, for another week. Louis Van Wootton, brave man he was, did not intend to allow the sublime spawn of his wife's kin to invade his home and his family. He strode right into the sitting room, ready to confront the fiend. But the creature had vanished. In his place stood Kate McCleester. Kate, stringy-haired and filthy, had only grown uglier since Louis's beautiful wife had left her 15 years before. Her one eye radiated fury and violence. Her cracked lip curled into a mocking smile. "I've missed you, Louis," she said maliciously. "I see the dogs have come for you and your blushing bride." Louis dove for her and tripped over a stool. Kate dashed away, cursing his incompetent staff for failing to light the candles. He stumbled to his feet. He could no longer see his hag of a sister-in-law. Feeling his way forward, though, he heard her voice. It echoed from the walls. "Louis!" it screamed. "Come join the Lord of the Day!" Louis cupped his hands over his ears. He found the staircase and trudged upward. He hadn't heard the front door open and shut. Kate must have climbed to the second floor. 2 candles did burn in the long second-story hallway. Louis likely thanked God and all the saints for this small bit of light, and for the good fortune his 14-year-old daughter and 6-year-old son had been spirited away to an aunt's house before the dinner party. He came to the dark doorway of his bedchambers. There he saw her. Kate, black shawl over her head, malicious eye laser-focused on him. He clutched her like a rag doll. He wrapped his fingers around her slender neck and squeezed, and squeezed, and squeezed. "Unander!" Louis whirled around, allowing Kate's limp form to slide from his grasp. Torches blazed. Dr. Woods stood in the hallway with a corps of police officers. In the lead, a brawny young man, revolver in hand. The doctor's face paled. "Good God!" he screamed. He ran past Louis Van Wootton to the broken woman sprawled across the bed. Louis turned. It wasn't Kate McCleester who lay dead. It was his wife, Kendra. Her long black shawl mimicked that of her sister. Angry black bruises dotted her pale, graceful neck. Dr. Woods clutched her wrist. "She's dead," he breathed. At the doctor's words, Louis turned into a monster. With a mighty roar, he seized a heavy candlestick and swung it at the police, then turned his malicious intentions toward the crouching doctor. "You're lying!" he screamed. "It's not Kendra. It's Kate! Kate the witch! It's Kate!" He lifted the candlestick above his head. Pop! With a flick of the young policeman's trigger finger, Louis Van Wootton collapsed. The rest of the posse didn't have time to ponder the odd turn of events. Peals of smoke wafted up from the lower floor, as did the low-pitched crackling of flames. The living fled the conflagration. By the time the authorities arrived with waters, the Van Wootton mansion was beyond saving, as were the bodies of the lord and lady of the house. Words of the demise of the beautiful Kendra McCleester and her rich, adoring husband made its way to 5 Points. For days it was all that anyone talked about. It was poetic, Kendra's death, at the hands of her savior, before her body had been engulfed by flames, so much like the flames she'd escaped years before. And Kate McCleester, it seemed, had achieved the destruction she desired. Her malevolent urge satisfied, she must have been swallowed up by the flames herself. She'd returned to the Lord of the Day. He'd taken her horrific dog-shaped cousins with her. Because after the night of the Van Wootton Manor fire, Kate McCleester was never seen in 5 Points again. Louis Van Wootton had been eulogized in glowing terms, a shrewd businessman, devoted husband, loving father. But as the statute of limitations ran out on "don't speak ill of the dead," tongues began to loosen. Those who did business with the Van Wootton brothers claimed Louis was a tempestuous man, prone to dark moods and fits of leonine rage, during which he'd procure a heavy object and aim it violently at anyone unfortunate enough to find themselves within striking range. Mr. Van Wooten clearly trusted few people. His attorney reported Lewis would appear outside his office, caught in a monsoon of anger twice a month to demand his will be adjusted, his wife and children removed. Lewis Van Wooten, it seemed, had become convinced he'd been made a cuckold. He claimed his beautiful wife bedded every low-class groom and butler on Fifth Avenue. He swore his children weren't his. In fact, his wife and daughter were likely plotting with their Irish peasant bedfellows to murder him and plunder his riches. The lawyer spent many an evening calming his temperamental client. He'd engineered a compromise. A stipulation was written into Lewis's will. If he came to his demise through homicide at the hands of his slag wife, bastard children, unscrupulous brothers, or any other individual, known or unknown, Kendra, Susan, and Alexandra would receive nothing. This, the lawyer explained, would guarantee his wife could not hire some cuckolding groom or opportunistic slum dweller to dispose of him. Doing so would all but guarantee destitution for her and her son and daughter. But Lewis Van Wooten's death had not been a murder. He'd been shot by a police captain, a certain John Staub, in the process of committing a crime. Susan and little Alex were placed in the custody of a doting aunt. When they reached the age of majority, they would inherit their father's entire estate. In 1889, a Boston journalist named Thomas Norris made a pilgrimage to 5 Points. A grandson of Fourth Ward Irish immigrants, he felt inspired to record the oral history of the neighborhood, as the gangsters who surveyed their heyday were aging and dying and Italian newcomers displaced the sons and daughters of Erin. This is how he came across the tale of Kate McCleester, the lady poisoner of Mulberry Street. Thomas Norris found himself particularly intrigued by Kate, not only because he found it fascinating a maimed beggar woman could inspire such fear in a neighborhood so famously derelict, but also because he knew of a dry goods store in Boston that sold green, tinged cold cream in misshapen bottles. The shop was owned and managed by 2 spinster sisters. One, quiet and scarred, mixed potions in a back room. The other, possessed of an ageless beauty, sang old Irish songs to unruly children. The 2 went by the names of Kate and Kendra O'Doul. "You found me," Kate said to Thomas Norris. "What do you want, a medal?" "I want to know how you did it," he replied. "What poison did you use?" Thomas had approached the store as the sisters were sweeping up for the night. He confronted the 2 with their 5 Points identities, then mollified the angry Thornbacks with a bottle of fine Irish whiskey. Kate took a long sip. Her wrinkled face broke into a smile. "Boy, I never poisoned no one." She pointed to her cold cream stacked in pyramids at the window and the bottles of tonic on shelves behind the cash box. Her ingredients were simple. She'd brought some seeds with her from Ireland, rented space in Rebecca Kleiner's yard for a penny a day, and grew herbs. She paid a river pirate to bring her pilfered cinnamon and turmeric, and she'd purchased beeswax in bulk from Temperance Wood's family. Her father, a farmer, kept hives. The recipes had been her Aunt Molly's. "Then how?" Thomas insisted. "Your sister. Multiple people claimed they saw bipedal black dogs lurking around the manor. They must have been drugged." Kate shot Kendra a sidelong glance. Kendra grinned like a schoolgirl, beautiful green eyes sparkling like emeralds. Thomas leaned back in his chair. It was story time. "When everyone thinks you're a prisoner," Kate started, "a peculiar thing happens. People start coming to you and asking for poison. And once you know who's trying to poison who, you've got the power that would strike envy in the richest bosses of Tammany Hall. The Mud Ghouls came first. They knew of a hefty load coming into the harbor and wanted a drug stiff enough to silence the roughest German ship's crew. Kate lied and told them she'd have their poison in 2 weeks' time. Next, she was approached by her old friend Gabe Callahan. "I never wanted Gabe in that way," she clarified. "I never had much use for men in the bedroom at all." Gabe found himself in a spot of hot water. He'd taken up with the wife of the Mud Ghoul's chief, and the two had been caught in a compromising position. He'd only managed to save himself from a bloody end by promising to lead the pirates to the church where the Bluebell dogs hid their loot. But this ruse wouldn't keep him alive for long. The Bluebell dog's stash was much less impressive than the treasure trove he advertised. And even if the sole ruby pendant hidden there had impressed the Mud Ghouls, Jig Clary would definitely figure out it was Gabe who betrayed their secret. So Gabe needed poison, either to do away with Jig or his lover's pirate husband. Not a minute after she'd told Gabe she'd see what she could do, and he'd scurried away, Kate was approached by a young police officer, John Staub. John wanted to know what Gabe, a known criminal, wanted with poison. Kate tracked down her own river pirate associate. She asked how many ships operated on the East River with primarily German crews. The pirate said he only knew of one, the Sunshine Jane. Then Kate summoned Gabe and John Staub and proposed a mutually beneficial situation. Gabe would provide John Staub with all he knew of the Mud Ghouls and their hiding holes. In exchange, John Staub would tell everyone he'd pulled Gabe's waterlogged body out of the East River and buried him in a pauper's grave. So Gabe, Thomas started. The madness was all an act. He's still alive, Kate said. He started a new life in Brooklyn, mixing cocktails at a society bar in the Heights. Next, Kate had been propositioned by two sets of women. First, a trio of Dropper Wallace's hired harpies, Scarlet Delilah and Sally Joan. Dropper no longer wished to drug his marks with chloroform. It was too unpredictable, and too often left him with a worthless corpse to dispose of. Instead, he desired a drug with hallucinogenic properties. The girls thought this was something Kate could arrange. Soon, though, they revealed there was one worthless corpse they longed to look upon, that of Dropper himself. Dropper kept their earnings and paid them pennies. He demanded sexual favors nightly. He ordered the girls to rob their customers, then let them take the beatings if they were caught in the act. After the prostitutes came the mags. The waifs between the ages of 13 and 15 were no longer precious kittens in Jig Clary's eyes. He'd made it abundantly clear they'd need to offer up their womanly charms to earn their keep. To him, his lieutenants, and any man willing to pay for the privilege. They couldn't run, Jig would find them anywhere, unless he were dead. Again, Kate brought the two factions together, and she did manage to procure what the prostitutes required from Rebecca Kleiner's shop, a bottle of New Orleans absinthe. The morning of the brawl, the three mags approached Dropper Wallace. They confessed their patron, Jig Clary, planned to rob his business that night and requested payment for this information. Instead, Dropper seized the prettiest mag and had his hired man tie her up. If Jig Clary wanted his lovely pet back, he would pay a hefty ransom. The bordello girls served their companions food and drink laced with absinthe. At the agreed-upon time, they feigned madness. Whether due to the absinthe or the power of suggestion, their clients became caught in the fantasy and saw the giant black dogs themselves. The girls lured them into the street, leaving the establishment unguarded. Then the Bluebell dogs, summoned by the remaining two mags, ensured Dropper Wallace and his thugs were duly occupied. Meanwhile, Gabe Callahan, alive and well, snuck into the London Owl. Assisted by Scarlet Delilah and Sally Jane, he found Dropper's office. The dark-haired mag who undid her ties led him right to the safe. They split the money. Gabe, the mags, and Dropper's stable of girls. Gabe started a new life in Brooklyn. The London Owl girls split off to seek their fortunes, and the mags secured their freedom, which they guaranteed by toppling a statue right on to Jig Clary's head. Thomas Norris couldn't contain himself. He laughed heartily. Then he caught Kendra's eyes, and his mirth withered. If Kendra Van Wooten was alive, he shared a drink with a woman who'd cruelly plotted the execution of her husband. Kendra's husband's discretion started small. He'd polished off too much bourbon every once in a while, then hurl cruel insults at his wife. His drunken stupors soon became a nightly occurrence, and his insults escalated to slaps. Before she knew what was happening, Kendra found herself pummeled and set upon with heavy objects. She wore long sleeves and heavy makeup to cover the bruises that marred her pale skin. Some days her wounds left her unable to rise from bed. Louis would laugh at her, mock her laziness. She fell pregnant twice between Susan and Alexander. Both children died inside her womb at the hands of their furious father. Once a month, after her husband passed out from drink, she'd take a horse and steal away to the 6th Ward to visit Kate. She'd bring her sister money and food. 15 years before, after the tenement fire, Kate fell to her knees and begged Kendra to leave her behind, to marry her rich sweetheart and be happy for the both of them. Now she begged just as fervently for her sister to take her children and escape. But both women knew this proposal was useless. Men did terrible things to women in the 6th Ward as well, at least in her 5th Avenue mansion. Kendra and the children could count on full bellies and warmth and medicine. Then Jeanette was murdered. The girl abandoned a doll in the parlor, a doll her father, unsteady from drink, had stumbled over. To discipline his daughter, he flung her down the stairs. Kendra heard her neck snap. As she screamed, her husband hoisted their limp child, carried her to the stables where he discarded her like garbage. He told the staff she'd been thrown from a horse. To rescue Kendra, Susan, and Alexandra, and ensure the children would inherit their father's estate, Kate raised an army. Rebecca Kleiner, mistress of disguise, designed monstrous costumes with odds and ends from her shop, curled horns, shoes made from horses' hooves, horsehair, grease paint, dog snouts. 6 women donned the wretched suits: Scarla, Delilah, Sally Jane, and the 3 Mags. The Van Wooten servants, as much targets of Louis's rage as his wife and children, let the 6 into the mansion. They forgot to light the candles. The middle-aged chef maid slaughtered a chicken and placed entrails on her chest, which 2 of the Mags pretended to eat. As the 6 costumed actresses put on a show, Kendra and Kate made use of the servant doors and hidden corridors. Kate lured Louis upstairs. Kendra snuck into her room and donned a shawl that mimicked Kate's. All the while, a short distance away, Police Captain John Staub prepared to repay what he owed Kate McCleester. It had been hers and Gabe's information that allowed his successful raid of the river pirates, which secured him a promotion, a raise, and a hero's reception. So he'd gotten himself on a patrol of the neighborhood that night. He'd ensured his platoon remained near the Van Wooten Manor in time to be summoned by the frantic cries of the horrified dinner guests, and he kept his loaded revolver in his coat. "But," Thomas stammered, "what if Louis actually killed you, woman?" Kendra offered a gentle jostle of her head. "He was going to kill me one way or the other." After the police and remaining guests fled the fire set by servants and the Mags in the kitchen, Kendra leapt to safety for the second time in her life out an open window. Thomas nodded. Then he narrowed his eyes. "The doctor," he announced. "The doctor confirmed you were dead. If you weren't, then—" Kate grinned. The doctor lied. Dr. Clarence Woods lied. He was in on the plan as well. Except, like so many unfortunate five-pointers, he'd been shanghaied. If he didn't play along and accused Louis Van Wooten of murder, then Kate would have told everyone what he and his new wife did to Temperance. Before Gabe, before the London Owl, before the fateful Van Wooten dinner, Temperance Woods had confided in Kate. She suspected her husband was carrying on an affair with her younger cousin. He'd as much said he wanted her, and the child in her stomach gone, but would never risk his reputation for a divorce. She found Clarence's prescription pad, and on which He'd practiced forging Temperance's handwriting. She gave the prescription pad to Kate. It was her insurance policy. And after her death, it became Kate's. He started it all, really, Kate mused. Clarence Woods, the wife killer. He accused me of poisoning Temperance. He stole the story from my Aunt Molly, a story I'd told him. And I doubt the people who talked loudest about being moral were often the least, like the pious gossips back home who accused my aunt of being a witch and birthing monstrous dogs with horns and hooves just because she'd been pregnant out of wedlock and her baby was born dead. Thomas Norris recounted his night with Kate and Kendra McCleester in his journal, but he never revealed their secrets. It's unclear what became of the sisters or any of the other characters that populated their story, and as the years have passed, memories have faded, and the old guard dies off, we'll never know which parts of the tale are truth, fiction, or fiction within fiction. To this day, the young boys and girls who play on the streets of old Five Points District sing this song. Don't say the name of old Kate McCleester. Her creatures will rise and her creatures will feast. They'll chew in your face and they'll chew in your toes. Then they'll drag you way down some mulberry hole. Don't say the name of old Kate McCleester. The bride of the dark, the mother of beasties. Her beasties no lies, and her beasties no truth. Sometimes the beastie might even be you. I hope you enjoyed the Ballad of Kate McCleester, Prisoner of Mulberry Street, by Nicky Exposito as performed by yours truly. If you enjoyed that tale and would love to read more from tonight's very talented featured author, you can help support him by visiting simplyscarypodcast.com/Nicky-Exposito. That's simplyscarypodcast.com/NICKY-EXPOSITO. Thanks again for your support of this program and tonight's featured author. Now, before we go, I'd also like to take a moment to thank you personally for joining me on this episode of Scary Stories Told in the Dark. If you enjoyed what you've heard on today's program, please take a moment to stop by our iTunes page or wherever else you listen to your favorite podcasts and leave us a 5-star review and a kind word. It makes a huge difference and would mean a lot to us. If you'd like to hear a premium extended edition of tonight's and all of our other podcast episodes featuring twice the terror, visit simplyscarypodcast.com today and click the Patrons link in the menu at the top of the screen. You'll find yourself at chillingtalesfordarknights.com, where you can purchase season passes for this podcast and our other quality storytelling programs, or become a patron for as little as $5 a month and get access to our entire audio archive dating back to 2012, all of it ad-free. If you happen to use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or YouTube, you can follow and subscribe to Chilling Tales for Dark Nights there, where you'll get all of our latest updates and new releases and have the chance to interact with us each and every week. You can subscribe to me on YouTube as well at the Otis Jiry channel, where you'll find releases of my series, Horror Story Time, dating back to 2014. And you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram too. Just search for Otis Jiry. Until next week, stay spooky. Get some sleep. If you can. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Scary Stories Told in the Dark, a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com today to learn more about our network and our other amazing storytelling programs. Tonight's program was hosted and its featured stories performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. Selected stories have been adapted with the kind permission of their respective authors. Original music provided by Luke Hodgkinson and Jesse Cornett. Sound design and final mixing and mastering provided by executive producer and director Craig Groshek. Program's artwork and logo by David Romero. If you're looking for some fresh tales on a daily basis while waiting for the next podcast, check out my YouTube channel, the Otis Jiry channel, and my extensive collection of narrated tales there. Simply search on YouTube by my name, and you'll find me. And don't forget to subscribe and press the bell notification icon to get my latest releases. Got a scary tale of your own that you'd like performed? I take submissions. Email it to me today at otis@simplyscarypodcast.com to have your terrifying tome considered for production in a future episode of this show. That's OTIS@simplyscarypodcast.com. If you've enjoyed what you heard on tonight's program and are joining us on your favorite podcast app, subscribe to us to be sure you never miss an episode, and leave a 5-star review and a comment. Your feedback means a lot to me. You can also follow Chilling Tales for Dark Nights and yours truly on Facebook to connect anytime and get the latest updates on this and other programs and my channel. If you're listening on the Chilling Tales for Dark Nights YouTube channel, do us a favor and hit the subscribe button and the bell notification icon for ctfdn as well to get more spooky tales from me and the crew and another episode of this program each and every Wednesday. And don't forget to hit that thumbs up button to tell us how we're doing and leave a kind word or a request. And don't forget to visit us at chillingtalesfordarknights.com and consider supporting the team by becoming a patron. In addition to helping us out, you'll get exclusive access to our audio archive and ad-free downloads of all your favorite stories, including those you've heard on this program. As for me, I'll be back next Wednesday with more terrifying tales to keep you up all night. But that's all right. Who needs sleep anyway?